Now on our news panel, Jill Tucker, staff writer for the San Francisco Chronicle, on the impact of the recession on public education. And Sandip Roy, editor for New America Media, on the results of the field poll. And Carla Marinucci, political reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle, on the fallout in California from the elections in Massachusetts. So, Paul, let's start, Carla. Why has Massachusetts had such an impact, at least on our minds, as to what it can do to the California elections?
That's right, Belva. I mean, because you have to wonder if the wave that began in Massachusetts this week is going to extend all the way to California, that angry voter wave, that independent voter wave that we saw that so shocked the Democrats in Massachusetts. We're a Democratic-leaning state, as you know, and two very big elections coming up. Senate race with Barbara Boxer at stake, the incumbent Democratic senator, and the governor's race where Jerry Brown is expected to be the Democratic. In both cases, these are people who could be hurt if there's an off with their heads, throw the bums out kind of mood that they had in Massachusetts. So that's one area where California's got to be looking at Massachusetts. Healthcare is another area. What's going to happen now that the Democrats have lost the 60th vote? And we saw Nancy Pelosi here in San Francisco this week. On the day before the election, she was telling us there is no way, we are not going back to the drawing board. We are going to deliver health care. And then reality hit on Tuesday.
Well, maybe one thing in Massachusetts, I met the winner, said before the election that he would vote against the health care reform bill.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And this is where Democrats, as we speak, are trying to figure out and recalibrate what is now going to happen to a year's worth of work that they've been doing. This is the big get for Obama. It's the thing he's been saying he's going to deliver. And we're going into these midterm elections. And Nancy Pelosi has got to be wondering as well. These midterm elections, some people are saying, is she going to be around after the midterm elections? Because how big are the losses possibly going to be for the Democrats?
Do you think so? The Democrats are hoping it's like Las Vegas, that whatever happens in Massachusetts stays in Massachusetts.
Yeah, exactly right. But you're right. They don't know where the impacts are going to start and stop. And when you're talking about health care, I mean, this is a very, very big deal. And as you know, we're talking about a $1 trillion plan here, and how Congress is looking at all kinds of options today. President Obama had to go out on the campaign trail again. And this is where the Democrats and the messaging of the Democrats is going to come in for a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking, I think.
This was, I think, a huge wake-up call. But you have to wonder that 2 days ago, they had this massive majority. They still do. They're just 59 instead of 60, right? But, and they couldn't get things done. They could have. They chose not to. They were trying to reach their hand across the aisle, getting it bitten off. Bipartisanship didn't work for them. But you do have to wonder that when they had that, they chose not to act with it. Yeah. And now they're sort of in a panic, but they had their chance to a certain degree.
I think, Jill, exactly. What this underscores is that the Republicans have really been very, very good about getting their own messaging out there and speaking to the public in a way that has resonated more, apparently, than the Democrats. Today's Gallup poll shows 55% of Americans at this moment do not want to go forward with this Democratic health care plan. And this was a plan that during the election we all covered.
Wasn't there something else that happened there? Hasn't this given new hope, regenerated the Republican Party? Maybe that's where we'll see this in California. This was a party that was pretty dispirited, but having this win might not inspire some people.
Exactly, Belby. You saw on Wednesday morning, the Republicans here were absolutely jubilant and saying, okay, Barbara Boxer is next, and you're already seeing, and you're going to talk about, Sandip, the results of the field poll. Barbara Boxer at one time was seen as, hey, a lock to win re-election, somebody who has done it 3 times before. I mean, and now we're looking at possibly a real challenge for her going forward.
But Carla, is Tom Campbell is no Scott Brown in terms of his relationship with the Republican Party itself. I mean, Tom Campbell has a very iffy relationship with his own party. People think he'll have a harder time with the primary than
that's right, Sandip. I think what we're going to watch here.
And he's no centerfold. He was never a centerfold. He doesn't have that going for it.
Well, I think what we're going to watch here in California is whether the same independent voters that played in Massachusetts such an important role will play here in California. And this is how it could reshape everything that goes on here. California, 1 out of 5 voters are independent voters. Massachusetts, it was more than 50%. Those are key voters as we go forward in all the elections.
2 things we have to say. We're talking about Barbara Boxer. Her opponent is Tom Campbell, a Republican.
That's right, yeah. And she's up against Tom Campbell, the Republican, former South Bay congressman.
He's the leader.
He's the leader
in the Republican
Carly
field.
Fiorina, who's a former Hewlett-Packard CEO, and an Assemblyman, Chuck DeVore, out of Irvine. So she's got 3 Republicans battling to take her on in November.
Okay, we didn't get to what the campaign financing measure that will impact, maybe that's
Boxer's race as well.
In the Boxer's race, and I'm sure that we'll be talking about that.
That's right, Supreme Court decision that could really play in because unions and big companies will now be allowed to spend unlimited amounts.
We've been talking about polls in terms of where Barbara Boxer and Tom Campbell have fallen into this, but your poll that you're talking about is a multilingual poll that has not been done before.
The field poll, as you know, Belva, has been doing these since 1947, I believe. And they've done a few polls in Spanish as well as in English. This is the first time they did it in 6 languages, including Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Korean, as well as, of course, English and Spanish. And the reason they did it is, I mean, quite obvious in a way. 3.7 million new voters that have been added to the California rolls in the last 20 years. Out of that, about almost 90% come from ethnic communities. So if you don't poll all these people who are the new voters, then where's the public in the public opinion? So it's trying to put the public back. And so they've done this poll looking at both like California voters, and it's a poll of voters looking at the economy, looking at the views on Obama, as well as this race that we are talking about, the Boxer-Campbell matchup. And the interesting thing where it comes in Massachusetts, there's the independent voter category, and then there's the ethnic voter category. If you look at the matchup according to the field poll, Barbara Boxer is the winner, but she's only the winner because she has double-digit leads in all the minority groups in among African Americans, among Latinos, a 30% lead, 10 to 20% among the different Asian groups. If it was just between non-Hispanic whites, right now, Tom Campbell actually has a slight lead over Barbara Boxer, like 43 to 48%. So the fact, if you don't take these different groups into account, it changes the complexion of the state, literally.
Sandip, I thought it was fascinating that of these the Asian groups, 50% of those polled chose to be polled in their in the language, Korean or Chinese or the other languages. It's a lot.
And that means that all those people were probably not being polled at all before.
And I have to think that the Democrats especially, but the Republicans as well, are going to be poring over this data to see what they haven't known and how this could affect the election in November and well into the future.
Even if you look at the Obama figures with the results, Obama's popularity, according to the field poll, his approval ratings are down to about 56% in California, which is 10 to 15 points down than from a year before. But again, the 56 number one is up there mostly because of his support among all these groups. African Americans still support him 89%. Latinos support him 67%. Of the Asian groups, the Vietnamese have the lowest level of support for Obama, but that is still 53%. But if the non-Hispanic white support has gone down to 48%, so in a way, when we lump it together and say California supports Obama 56% or not, but when you look within these, peel it back and look at the subgroups, if I was, whether I was working on Boxer's campaign or Obama's re-election campaign, I would be looking at these numbers very, very carefully.
So did they have numbers on the governor's race at all this week?
They're all also did the numbers in the governor's race, and it's actually similar to the numbers.
What were the findings there?
The findings, again, Jerry Brown has a lead among but mostly because of all these different groups that have the minority groups who do support the Democratic candidate. Now, of course, the thing is that you remember also is that among the Asian groups, there's a lot of undecideds. The number of undecideds is very high. So there is some pickings there. If I was the Republican, these two strategies would be either, go after these undecideds or figure out how do you make these voters stay at home on election day and not come out.
Doesn't that present a problem, though, for the Republicans? I mean, all you hear from their leadership is we have to have a big tent, we have to broaden our outreach to people. Maybe this will be...
It's like Prop 180, it's like the ghost of Prop 187 still haunts the Republican Party when Pete Wilson did some of these measures which were perceived by Latinos.
Jerry Brown has had strong support among Latinos. And in fact, in this survey, he comes out 10 points ahead of Meg Whitman, the closest challenger, who just put another $20 million into her campaign. I'm sure the Republicans, though, as Jill said, will start looking at this data and try. Do you think this is really going to help craft some of the messages when you go forward?
I mean, if you were any kind of political analyst, you would definitely, I mean, this hasn't been done before. So even when you've known a little bit about the Hispanic voter population, but you've never looked at these smaller groups, the Asians, and now this is the first. And the difference, so it's not like this big umbrella.
The Chinese are very different than Vietnamese.
It's not like, not like it's a big bowl of rice and everybody's in there.
How do they feel about the #1 issue, the economy?
In their, 90% across the board unanimously feel that the economy is in the dumps, and they are all, equally dismal about it. But even there you see variations. This was the first time the field poll said in years that for 3 years in a row, California voters have said that they feel like the economy is going badly for them, and that they're disappointed or they're nervous about the future. But even there, if you look at it, you can see who's been hurt more. Like Latinos and African Americans have like 70–80% feeling that unemployment is a huge, very serious problem. Among the other groups, it might be 60% or 50%, still a majority, but a little less.
Well, that moves us right along to the recession, the economy, and education. Jill, you wrote a story today, just as an example, that San Francisco is looking at a $113 million shortfall, which is going to cause more layoffs in education, and education has been hard hit, and the achievement gap has widened?
Yeah, it is, San Francisco is talking about this 113 million number over the next 2 years, which is, as one parent said, it's just mind-boggling. And what's happening with this study that came out of UCLA is that we're seeing the recession is hitting schools really hard. If you have a kid in a school, you already know that because you know there are fewer custodians, the summer school programs have been cut, class sizes have been inching up. But what this study told us and what we're seeing in San Francisco with these numbers, this budget shortfall, is that it's hitting the high poverty schools much harder than it is the other schools. And when you have efforts to close the achievement gap and you have summer school getting canceled more for the low-income kids, you are driving a wedge in the achievement gap. Their teachers are the first ones to get laid off. The study is showing, amazing things that when they looked at the high poverty schools, the schools with the most low-income kids, about 50% had eliminated summer school compared to 17% of the other schools where the kids are not low income. So when you're seeing that type of inequity in how the cuts are hitting the schools and how the recession is hitting the schools, you are taking a wedge and you are driving it into the achievement gap and pushing those sides farther apart.
And how is it, President Obama has this Race to the Top initiative. He talks about closing the achievement. How is it going to affect? We've been talking about that for the last couple of weeks here. What's the implications?
All week long, when I'm writing about this, I'm writing about San Francisco's budget shortfall and the Race to the Top. I keep picturing in my mind Sisyphus, pushing that boulder up the hill and having it roll back on his toes, and it sort of feels that we are battling the recession in general and a lot of these funding issues and these systemic issues of the teachers getting laid off in these schools because they don't have the seniority and a lot of these things that are embedded in our system. And I just look at Race to the Top and these other things and think, if California gets $700 million, San Francisco, just to repeat what Belva said, 113 million shortfall just here. So you start realizing that the efforts that they're putting into the achievement gap, you know, there's some really good ideas there, but they are really, this is a Sisyphus, you know, example of fighting a losing battle, at least to a certain degree.
What does this mean, though? You know, I saw a study from California Watch that New American Media helped with a little bit on the class size reduction thing, and about how many school boards, like the San Jose school superintendent said, like, oh, if I let the class size go up to 30, I can save $4 million. So as a result of this, do you think the class size stuff is going to get gutted?
You know, it is absolutely on the table in San Francisco. The unions don't want to see it, and parents don't want to see the class sizes go up. They love it. Class size reduction is almost a, you know, a sacred cow now in schools. But in San Francisco, Superintendent Garcia was talking about the implications of that, and what he said was, and I thought this was fascinating. He said that they could save $500,000 per grade level for every one student increase in class size. So you have to realize that that is very, you know, a very easy way to back off on, very tempting, and they don't want to lay off teachers, you know, so where do you pick? And the reality is these class sizes are helping the struggling students, the students at the low end of the achievement gap, they get more attention and these types of things. So when you start biting into all of these programs, it
Jill,
just
was there any good news at all in this survey?
No.
All right. We'll stop right there then.
Sorry.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us, Jill, Sandip, and Carla.